Hi. Thank you for joining our webinar about a masterclass and how to create a rubric that really works and works for you. I'm gonna jump right in here and go ahead and share my screen. I'm really excited to get started here. All right, so the interesting part about this webinar is that we had a lot of our experience managers working with professors who were excited to try a writing assignment in their class, but weren't really sure where to start. They wanted to have writing, they know it's valuable for their students, but then when it went to uh, actually writing out the criteria and what would make a writing assignment successful, they were finding that y'all were having a hard time, and not because you're not able to do it, but just it's something that isn't uh, part of the everyday practice. It's not something that you've necessarily been trained in or really been expected to do. So what we wanted to do is provide a resource to be able to create a really strong resource rubric so that you can do it for any assignment that you want to do it. You have this in your back pocket. And of course, so you can use it on Packback as well. But really, this is something that hopefully you can walk away with how to build a rubric for any assignment, whether it's on Packback or somewhere else. So really, I want to start with why use a rubric at all? What's the point of having one? And really what it comes down to is that it provides clarity to your students. It allows you to have some objective grading and also removes any barriers to being successful. Think about, having a really great syllabus. When you provide really clear expectations, you get less questions. Not that you get none, because sometimes people don't read it. But at the end of the day, when you provide something that's really clear and lays out how to be successful, you get less questions and you see a lot more success. So you'll see better execution and assignments if you have a really great rubric. I want to just think through, take a minute here. What gets in the way of using a rubric? Like, what's challenging when we use a rubric? Or stops you maybe from even using a rubric in your assignments or even thinking about using one in your assignments? Some of the things that we often hear are, it's time consuming. I'm not really even sure where to begin. I don't know the best practices. I always think I'm going to do it, but then don't do it because it takes a lot of brain power that I don't have right now. I'm really busy. So those are some of the things that stop us from using a rubric. And the goal today is to just go over the basics. What is a rubric? How do we set one up successfully? What questions should we ask ourselves as we're building a rubric? And then in our future webinars, we're going to also talk about how to create different rubrics for different types of courses, and then also how to create a rubric really quickly using lots of different tools, one of them being generative AI. So let's jump in to what we're going to go through today. So let's start with kind of the ins and outs and basics of a rubric. Before I jump in, I just want to start this with having an assignment in mind, because I think that'll make walking through a rubric much more supportive when you could think of what's something that I could benefit from having a rubric in. Is there an assignment you've always wanted to do that you just haven't because you don't have the clear expectations? You're not sure what that would look like. Or maybe a writing assignment that you have tried, but it seems like students are always missing the mark and you're not really sure why. Excellent. Let's use that to walk us through. So there's three main parts to a rubric. There's the criteria, the performance levels, and then the points. Seems pretty obvious there. So the basics of the criteria is really that these are the buckets that you're going to use to determine what you want to see in a student paper. It's really the bigger themes of what are the outcomes you want to guide towards students towards. So Some examples I have on here, thesis statement. You might want to make sure that's like a big focus for your students. They need to have a strong thesis statement, or they have not executed this paper well. Might be that you need them to really talk about the concepts in the course. So you might put course concepts. It might be that they can clearly express their opinions, something like that. So really thinking through different buckets. That's what the criteria are. And you might have a different amount of criteria based on the assignment. Something that is a little bit lower stakes, you're probably gonna have less criteria. So a weekly reflection paper, you're only gonna have maybe 2 criteria, not something that needs to have tons and tons of grading on it, and also not something that needs a lot of different pieces of clarity. Whereas at the end of the semester research paper, you're gonna want to have more criteria because it is a more time-consuming paper. It also has more expectations attached to it. When you're thinking about what criteria do I use for my paper, really think through these 2 questions. What are the goals and learning objectives for this assignment? If you don't have those yet for the assignment, start there, because that's also going to guide how you determine if it's a well-executed paper and give all your instruction within that rubric. And the second piece are, what skills or knowledge do you want students to demonstrate through this assignment? And it could be skills that you want them to demonstrate or also build while working through the assignment. But those 2 questions you really want to think through, because this is what blocks some people from getting started. Like, I don't even know what criteria to use. Let's walk through a bit of an example here. So here's an assignment that, I've thought through a little bit before. This is a marketing assignment, not a marketing major, no marketing history. So please forgive me if this would be a horrible marketing assignment. But think through, a student has to develop a comprehensive marketing plan for a new product or service launch. And they may choose any type of product or service to build their plan around. Now, the goals of the assignment are for students to display their knowledge of the core marketing strategy concepts. So probably the things that talked about in class, the reading they're supposed to be doing, are they displaying that knowledge? Applying that marketing knowledge to develop a plan for a new product launch. Doing market research and situational analysis. And then, really honing in on those written communication abilities through professional marketing plan development. So when I read through these, there are really 4 main buckets that stood out to me when I was asking myself, what are the goals? What are the skills that this assignment is expecting a student to demonstrate? The first is marketing concepts. That was my first criteria. Do they have a firm understanding of those marketing concepts? Without that, the rest of this assignment might fall apart a little bit. Situation analysis and market research. They need to do that analysis, and they need to have strong market research. That's another piece I'm gonna want to look at individually and give some strong feedback on. What does their plan look like? The plan. And then the final piece here, I would hone in on communication abilities. So maybe that's just grammar and mechanics. But I know for myself, I would want this to look professional. If this is, they're trying to market a plan here, they're trying to market a plan for a new product or a service, it needs to look professional. So I could call that grammar and mechanics. Maybe I would call it overall professionalism, something like that. So now I'm ready with my criteria. Then I haven't even thought yet how I might flesh each of those out and how I might describe each of those. But the criteria is where I'm going to start and then build from there. The other nice piece about the criteria is really once you have those down on paper, you can always, move it around as you just start moving into this performance levels, which is what we're going to move into next. Maybe you realize this wasn't as important. Maybe I put plan as one of my criteria here, but I actually realized that goes into professionalism, what that plan looks like. It's not so much the market research and the situation analysis are the more important pieces. And I'm going to split situation analysis and market research into two separate criteria, so I can really dig into those when I'm looking at this paper. And I want students to really dig into that when they're doing the assignment. So take a second here and just think through what would be some of the criteria you might use on your assignment. And maybe this is an assignment, like you said earlier, that you're thinking through, like, I've never been able to give a really good rubric for. What are the main goals and objectives of that assignment? And what skills do you want students to walk away from? Right. All right, now let's dig in to this next part. The first part, criteria, is where people get stuck because they don't know where to start. It's hard to think of those first initial pieces. Once you have those, the performance levels, to me, this is the most fun part. This is where you get to be clear. You get to talk about the thing you're excited about. It's like, what do I want you to demonstrate? What am I excited to read in your paper or look at in your project? So let's go through building this clear performance levels. First, when you're building performance levels, this is where the crux of your rubric can be really helpful. So this is where setting up well allows you to grade really quickly and allows you to grade objectively, and also offers clarity for your students and hopefully less questions for you as well. This is the part, like I said, like the syllabus, if it's really well built out, you can point students back to it. Hey, you don't understand why you lost points? Go look at that rubric. I gave you less points because of what it says right here in the performance level. You also have TAs who could say, hey, I gave this grade because it's in the rubric. We all use the same rubric. Any other ideas there from your TAs can also be really supportive as well for both you and for your students. So let's jump in to a few examples here. Excuse me 1 second. So notice here in this example, each description has a really clear expectation for how to get full points and what happens if you don't get full points. The other thing I want to point out here is that it doesn't have a time. You don't need to write 2 whole paragraphs on how to meet this criteria. You can if you love doing that, but if writing a rubric, you keep getting blocked from doing it because it takes you a long time, know that actually having less information but making it short and clear leads to really much stronger success for your students, and also makes it easier for you to grade as you're going through. So let's start just with this example of the title opening and closing. What I love about this is that it lays out really clearly. It's eye-catching, creative, interesting title and opening, and it also talks about making sure that the topic is not the same as the title. So differentiation there. So just really clear. This is what I want for exemplary. I always say to start with this one because when you start here, it makes it easier to go down into those other levels. Then the next one is simple. May have something interesting, but one of these is missing. 2 of these is missing. 3 or more are missing. And then same with opinion. So it starts talking about it, being really strong, clear, understandable, avoids overuse or over-reliance on the words of others. Opinion is consistent. For 3, opinion still has to be consistent, but it may use, more quotes or words than are needed, right? So the other thing you want to think about as you're building this rubric, and you can see this in these examples, is making sure that you have a piece that can be measurable and can be seen as really strong and has various levels as you go down. So for example, if I had, actually I'll show you on the next example. So let's look at this example. So if I had thesis and I said had a thesis, doesn't have a thesis, that's just two levels, and it doesn't really give a student enough clarity because they might not know what is a good thesis, what isn't a good thesis. There is some variance here of like the best of the best versus something not great. Now, if this is just something that you don't care about, then I wouldn't even add it as a criteria. Or you could make it really, really short and sweet. It's like, has it, it's strong, has it, not strong, doesn't have a thesis. Keep it short and sweet. This has 4 levels here, and you can see each of those levels. The other thing that I want to talk a little bit about here is that in these levels, we have 3 criteria, 1, 2, 3, the thesis, argumentation, and contents and ideas. And then we have 4 performance levels. You can do more performance levels. We do no more than 6 performance levels because it can be confusing for students if you have more than that. I wouldn't recommend ever doing more than that, but you can do less too. Some people do 3 instead of 4. The other piece to note here is as long as you have some variation between the top and the bottom, that's what can indicate for you how many performance levels make the most sense. Most people, again, do 4. All right, let's jump in here to the points in the rubric system here. So right here we have determined the points in the rubric system, and what we can do is think through how to do that. So this part seems like it's somewhat obvious, but then also it becomes hard as you start to write out the points and you want to kind of divvy those out. So just some rules of thumb. Assign more points to criteria that are more central to the learning goals. Make sure point values reflect the relative importance and effort required for each criteria. And keep the total point points reasonable. So you don't want one to be worth 50 and one worth 2, but maybe you have one that's worth 30 and worth 10. That's fine, but keep them reasonable. You don't want like one area being 50 and something else being really teeny tiny, because then students won't pay attention to that teeny tiny part. When you think through assigning your points, know that this is what's going to guide your students in thinking through what's most important, what should take them the most time. If you have that balance, strong, then your students are going to spend time exactly where you want them to. So from the previous example, if really you want them to have super strong marketing concepts, putting a lot more points on marketing concepts and less points on professionalism will be supportive. Now, maybe professionalism and marketing concepts, equal importance, equal points. Great. So let's keep going here. And what I want to do is actually get into Packback a little bit and actually build a deep dive before, or actually build a rubric. Before I actually jump into building a rubric, I do want to just show you what deep dives looks like, because it is something that, obviously we use at Packback and can be really helpful. It also is where we're going to get our hands on here in building that rubric. So what deep dives is a platform for students to do their writing assignments that allows them to get live feedback as they're writing, and then also makes the grading easier for you. So the way that I think about this is that Packback's AI assistant is that red pen writing. It grades some of these more automatic pieces, such as grammar, mechanics, some pieces on citation, things like that. So students are getting better feedback as they write. Flow and structure, you can see that as well. So when you go to grade, really what you get to focus on is the rubric that you've built and the concepts, the part of your course that you really love and find super important, opposed to, did you use an apostrophe here? Did you use transition words? you get to focus on some of those more important concepts there. So you can see here that, I have some text in here, and on the right, the student has feedback of potential grammar issue. They can review that, and it will go ahead and tell them exactly what to do. One big note here is that this AI writing assistant is not going to do any writing for students. It's not going to come in here and give them text to write. It's going to give them coaching on what they can do and how they can grow. So we'll give them feedback here and talk them through that. If this is something you're interested in, I definitely recommend discussing with your EM, because your experience manager will tell you if this is a great fit for your course or if maybe this assignment won't fit in. A lot of assignments do fit in with deep dives, but if for some reason, for example, the only thing you care about, your number one, your 50 points on the rubric, is that they have perfect APA citing, deep dives probably not going to be the place for you to do your writing. But if you want students to really explain a concept, if you want them to work on their professionalism, if you want them to work maybe on a lab report and get that feedback, this is going to be a great spot for that. And like I said, there's a future webinar where we'll talk through Packback and different assignments, but that's kind of an overview of what that does here. So this is just the student view, and then I'll also show you the professor view where you can see what grading looks like. So I can look at some submissions here. Let me go back. Do you have any submissions on this assignment? I do. And you could see over here, I've got 0 points clearly from this example, and I can view the full rubric, and they got 50 out of 50 on that part. Awesome. All right, so now what I want to do is jump back into our rubric. And like I promised, we're going to go ahead and build an actual rubric right now. So let me jump into that on deep dives as well. Let me stop sharing my screen and I'll pull that up for us. Okay. So if you have deep dives right now in your community, I'll walk through where it is. If you don't have deep dives right now in your community, what I'll do is walk through this, and then definitely reach out to your experience manager. You can reach out to me after this, or we'll reach out to you as well and see if that's something you're interested in. And you'll be able to play around with it a little too. Maybe you just want to see what it looks like before you decide if it makes sense for your course. But we can always give you access to a sandbox community or something like that so you can practice. So I'm going to go to the main page and create a new assignment. And then I'm going to create a new rubric here. And what you can see is what I already mentioned earlier in the demo piece. We walking through the Deep Dives platform is we have some of these AI assisted grading features. So you actually don't even need to think through how do you set up this part of the rubric. That's already set up for you. You can go in and then edit what's important. So maybe word count isn't important to you. You would just uncheck that box. But let's say it is, we'll keep that there. We'll add in a title. I'm just going to put version 2, add in a title, and then move on down. So word count, research, and citations. And it tells you right here, what will AI grading assistant check on research and citations? And here, in addition to checking that your student met the minimum number of sources, the AI grading assistant will help assess the credibility and academic nature of student sources. So it'll help assess that. Now, I'm going to build out a rubric here. And one thing I want to say is, for my assignment, research and citations, not as important. I'm going to give, only 5 points for that. And I'm expecting them to use 3 sources. I don't care that much about formatting, so I'm going to take that off. Students will still get feedback on formatting, but it won't be a part of their grade. Same for grammar and mechanics. If you want them to get feedback, but you don't want it part of the grade, you could take it off. In my class, it is important or would be important, so I'm going to keep that on there. And then the last piece I think I'll edit here is I care about word count. I don't care that much about it. I just want them to know the expectation. So I'm going to make that worth 4 points. Now my AI graded part is 30. I always recommend keeping this on Packback, above 5, maybe even closer to 10, but definitely 5 or above, because it will round. So if you only put 1 point here, students are probably going to get full credit, because if they make a few errors, they'll still get 1 point. Versus 5, there's a little bit more variance there. There's more variance in 10 and how many points they can get. So excellent. Now I'm going to go down to this instructor graded rubric section. And let's jump into here for how to do this. So we talked earlier about creating our criteria first, thinking through what are the criteria you want to have a successful assignment. And my first criteria here, I'm going to do a thesis statement, because when I have most papers, a thesis statement is really important to me. And then you can update these performance levels. You can, I put exemplary, accomplished, developing, and beginning. Maybe you want this to say, let's say, not acceptable or not evident, something like that. The thesis statement is not evident. I'm going to put that there. You can also see that right now, this section's out of 10 points. And I'm going to keep it out of 10 points because my paper, I want it to be out of 100. And a thesis statement is important, but it's not the most important thing. The best thing I love about this is you can guess and check. So maybe later I add my next criteria and I'm like, ooh, I actually want this to be more points because I don't have as many criteria and this is more important than I thought it would be. So I have exemplary. And then I'm going to start with my first piece. This is the part that I want to be measurable. I want it to really start with something clear, and that is the highest expectation, what I expect from this. And that's the essay contains a clear, well-developed thesis statement that previews the main points. Something I can point back to, something that anybody else grading, and something that students can point out to. It's like, I got full points because I was able to do this. Now, I think it's still accomplished if it contains a thesis statement that previews the main points, but it might need some clarification or development. It wasn't as clear as it could have been. It talks about the main points, but maybe it's just kind of a long sentence and could have been broken up differently, something like that. Now, in terms of developing, the thesis statement is vague, right? It's unclear and doesn't fully preview the main points. Again, a student gets a 2 and they ask why. It's right here in the rubric. You got a 2 because the essay contained a thesis, I thought, but it was vague, it wasn't clear, and it didn't really preview those main points. The end, then go right to it. And then last one, missing or does not relate to the content. And then I'm done with this criteria. Now I want to add some more criteria. I also want to add marketing strategies as my criteria here. So I'm going to call that marketing strategies. We put content and ideas because if you want just one criteria, you can keep it as content and ideas. But let's go ahead now and think through this. So I'm going to keep mine exemplary. You could again change the different performance levels. I'd like to keep it consistent, but there is no best practice there. If you want to change that, you can. Now, again, I start with what is my full expectation, and then I can pare it down from there as I go through each performance level. Marketing strategies fully developed, demonstrating how to improve the products, its position of value. All 4 elements of the guide were addressed and expanded upon. So in this assignment, I'm referring to a guide. I would probably have that in my assignment description of what they're expected to do. I'm going to talk about that guide. Then in my next level, I take it down just a little bit here. So I still want all 4 elements to be addressed. That's what it's going to take to have an accomplished score here. But it's mostly developed demonstrating how to improve product position and value. All 4 elements of the guide are addressed. You could change this. You could even make this, 3 or more. More elements of the guide were addressed. So if they miss something, they still get credit, but they're not getting, they're not missing everything. And then I'm just going to keep going down. And I would, make this all 4 of the elements of the guide may not have been addressed, and it's just somewhat developed. Last one, inadequately developed. And that's it. So now my rubric is created here. I just put in 2 criteria. I could put in more, but I don't think you need to watch me put those in there. I'm going to go ahead and save and use this. Now I've created the rubric. I'm going to select a prompt that I've already created. And I'm going to publish my assignment. Now there's no due date here, so there's no problem with that. I can publish it and no students can see it, just I can see it, but I know that it's there for me to be able to use and add a date to. Publish my assignment. And now I can really see my rubric here. So I've got my thesis statement and the expectations. I got my marketing strategies and my expectations. Each of these are out of 10 points. I could maybe make my marketing strategies more. I probably would. I'd probably make that 30 because this is where I spent the most time. I want them to spend the most time. They need to have a thesis statement and think through it, but the bulk of this paper is going to be on those marketing strategies. So I'll increase those points. And then we go through and we have this AI grading assistant piece, the word count, research quality, grammar mechanics, flow, and structure. And then the total point value is 50 points. Excuse me. So that's how I went ahead and created that rubric. And hopefully that was helpful for you to see this is how we walk through a rubric and think through the different, criteria and pieces. I want to wrap us up here, but as I wrap us up, what I want to do is just talk through some of our best practices, some of the, hot tips and ideas that we've learned over time. So first is really keep it clear and simple. Rubrics do not have to be long and complicated. The simpler and clearer they are, the more success you're going to have. You're going to see students be able to meet your expectations. You also are going to have a much easier time grading. Use generative AI to help. A lot of what I recommend doing when coming up with a rubric is using generative AI. You can put your syllabus or your assignment into generative AI and say, give me some criteria for a rubric for this assignment, and it will spit it out to you. It's not always perfect. It's not maybe exactly what you would do, but it does give you a good starting point. And I'll actually walk through how to do that in a couple of weeks, what I would do and how I do that to create a really quick assignment that has high quality and a really strong rubric. And then you can also get access to our agnostic rubrics. We have rubrics that are already created and ready to go that you are able to use that will allow you to use in your future deep dive assignments. You'll get those through using Packback deep dives, and you definitely would recommend using that as a way to get access to some agnostic rubrics and some examples of rubrics so that you can have really strong assignments for your class. With that, I am going to just wrap us up. I do want to remind you of our upcoming webinars. So, we have one on the 7th, which is how to use Packback in almost any assignment. I've referenced that a couple times, but we're going to go through how to use in a lab report, how to use in a end of term paper, reflections, different types of assignments there. And then we're going to talk through creating a writing assignment in 15 minutes. Spoiler, I talked about it a little bit, but we're going to talk about using generative AI to help create high quality assignments that are meaningful for your students and help you meet help your students meet the objectives that you want them to meet. And then we have a monthly webinar that we do. It's an education and generative AI roundup, which really just talks through kind of a podcast style webinar, but talks about different updates in AI and how it's affecting education and different things that we're learning there. Those are really great webinars that can be super helpful, just keeping up to date with everything that's going on in the world. So please welcome to join those, and very excited to keep walking through this series with you on creating really great writing assignments and using Packback deep dives.